Okay, I think we're going to get started. It's straight up 1. And this is the challenging time of day when everybody wants to take a nap and has to listen to some really technical stuff. So, my name is Marilyn Sword. I'm the Executive Director of the Idaho Council on Developmental Disabilities. And we are a 23-member volunteer board appointed by the governor. There's one of us in every state, and we advocate with and on behalf of people with developmental disabilities. I think many of you have heard the saying that there are two things you don't want to watch being made, and one is sausage and the other is laws. So I hope you come away from today feeling a little bit better about the process and don't feel like it's sausage. The legislative process, how a bill becomes a law, a little bit about rules and budgets, and it's going to be a pretty high-level overview of the process. Could I ask, before today, how many of you have been in the Capitol? Oh, that's terrific. That's terrific. If this is your first time, I would encourage you to wander around after you're through today, if you have time. These kinds of workshops are really nice when they're done in conjunction with a tour of the building, and we don't have time to do that today. But it really is a beautiful building, and while not as accessible as we might like, is a building that I'm very proud of as a citizen of Idaho. So we're going to talk about the legislature. Idaho has what's often referred to as a citizen legislature, which means that most if not all of the legislators have other jobs. The legislature meets only part-time, few staff compared to other legislators. And it's interesting when you think about the profession of legislators. I think people always assume maybe it's a lot of lawyers. There's really very few lawyers. There's only 9 out of 105 in Idaho's legislature. Most, 46%, nearly half, are either business people or farmers or ranchers. And about 10% are retired. The legislature is, on average, a lot older than the population at large. But I think it's important that you remember that these people are your neighbors. They are, you may live next door to a legislator, but they are, they're folks just like you from your towns and neighborhoods. 85% of Idaho's legislators are Republican, and 77% are men. So that tells you kind of right there what the makeup of the legislature is. In the House of Representatives, you can see the difference, the split there, primarily men and Republicans, and the same in the Senate. Very small minority party in Idaho. You often hear about term limits and throw the rascals out, and we don't have term limits in Idaho, but we really don't need them. You can see that about 3/4 of the legislators have served less than 12 years, and 18 of that 105 are in their very first term. And that's not an unusual turnover. We have really a very regular turnover in who our legislators are. We have 35 legislative districts in Idaho, and each district have 44 counties, but 35 legislative districts. And each district is represented by 1 senator and 2 representatives. So wherever you live in Idaho, you're represented by 3 legislators. And each of the legislators serves a 2-year term. It's not like in Congress where the senators serve a 6-year term and the House is a 2-year term. Everybody in the Idaho legislature is a 2-year term. They're paid $16,000 a year, and I'll let you decide if that's too much or not enough. And the speaker, the leaders in both sides, the Speaker of the House and the pro tem in the Senate, get an additional $4,000 that are kind of attributable to their leadership responsibilities. And the pay for legislators is not, they don't set it, but it's set by a legislative compensation commission. They also have some per diem that they get in addition to that $16,000. The legislature meets starting in January for about 3 months. And in 2003, the legislature went until May. And I can tell you that everybody was very cranky by that time. People were more than ready to go home, those of us who worked with them and the legislators themselves. This year, I don't anticipate it being like that because we've got an election and new legislative districts. So I think people are going to want to get out of here and get campaigning. There can be special sessions to the legislature that aren't that January through March. And in 2008, when Senator Risch was then governor, he called a special session to cut the property taxes and add a cent to the sales tax. And I think the session lasted like a day. And so you can have those. They don't happen very often, but you do have special sessions. Leadership. The leadership in the Senate is comprised of the lieutenant governor, who it's odd in the Senate because Brad Little is the lieutenant governor of Idaho. He's not a senator, but he presides over the Senate. He's elected as separately from the governor, and he is not a senator. He used to be a senator, but he's the one who presides over the operations of the Senate. And then you have officers in the majority party, the Republican Party here, and in the minority party. And from this area of the state, you can see that Senator Winder and Senator McGee are both in leadership in on the Republican side, and Senator Bach from here in Boise is in leadership on the Democratic side. In the House, the leadership is the Speaker, and he is a very powerful entity in the House. His name is Lawrence Denny. He's been the Speaker for quite a while. He's from Midvale, which, interestingly enough, I think was where Senator Larry Craig was from. It's interesting that you have this small town that produces these leaders. You can see the majority leadership in the House, starting with the majority leader, Mike Moyle, who's from Star, and then the minority leadership includes two people from Boise. Elfrida Higgins is the assistant minority leader, and Brian Cronin from here in Boise is the caucus chair. We're going to talk a little bit about committees. Committees is where all the heavy lifting in the legislature is really done before the legislature even starts or in committees during the session. And there's certain things that apply to all the committees, except you see there JFAC. All the committees meet on this level. So if you're ever coming here to attend a committee hearing, you're going to come to this level. All the Senate committees meet in this wing, and all the House committees meet in the opposite wing. All the meetings are open to the public, and they generally accept public testimony. They have agendas that are posted outside the doorway, and they're also online. And if you can't get to the Capitol and you would like to hear the deliberation in a committee and you have access to the internet, you can listen to audio streaming of the committee discussions in the committee meeting that way. But when you come in, you just, if you want to participate, you come in, you see where your committee is meeting, and the committees are written on the doorway of the rooms, so you can find out which committee is meeting in which room. You come in, you sign in. Most committees want you to sign in whether you're speaking or not. And then if I'm not going to get into the testifying business because I think that's going to be addressed later on, but then you'll have a chance to speak to the committees. There are 10 committees in the Senate, and they all meet anywhere from 2 to 4 times a week. Some meet in the morning, some meet in the afternoon, And committees, either they meet on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, or Tuesday, Thursday, or odd days, or whatever. The exception to that is the Senate Finance Committee, and that's why that's got an asterisk by it, because it's a committee that meets in conjunction with the House Committee, and it's the only one that does that. So just a sec, and I'll talk to you about JFAC. So here you can see the House committees, and they're pretty similar to the Senate committees, except there's 4 more of them. And you can see I put an asterisk by the Appropriations Committee because it's the Appropriations Committee that meets in conjunction with the Senate Finance Committee. Most of the things that we're involved with are before the Health and Welfare Committee on both sides, but sometimes it's the Transportation Committee if it's an issue involving public transportation. It might be Judiciary if it's something to do with civil rights or guardianship law or something like that. Or it might be Education if it's something to do with special education. But largely it's health and welfare. This last year in the House Health and Welfare Committee was very large, and they split it in 2. And they left all the Medicaid issues with the House Health and Welfare Committee, but they took most of the other Department of Health and Welfare related issues and put it in the House Commerce Committee. So that was, I think, kind of probably a little confusing for people to try to track. Okay, now we have JFAC. JFAC stands for Joint Finance Appropriations Committee. And this is an unusual committee because it's comprised of 10 senators and 10 representatives. They meet every morning at 8 o'clock. They do not meet on this level. They meet up on the 3rd floor in the old Supreme Court chambers. And they kind of operate from a different set of rules than anybody else. They do not take public testimony. Now, that doesn't mean somebody from the public would not be able to talk, but generally it's at the request of one of the committee members if they have particular issues that they want answers to. This is, without question, Rev and Tax is an important committee, but this is the important committee. This is the committee that, until recently, if you were a freshman legislator, you didn't get a spot on JFAC because it was the heavy hitters. You can't be a committee chair of another committee and serve on JFAC because it is so intense, the amount of work that has to be done. But these are the folks that set all the appropriations for all the spending for the state. So they control the purse strings. So they're important. Interestingly, the current chairs of that committee are both from the same legislative district, which puts an extraordinary amount of power in one legislative district. That's Representative Maxine Bell and Senator Dean Cameron, and Representative Bell's from Jerome, and Senator Cameron's from Rupert. There are a lot of other people that work kind of more behind the scenes than the legislators around here that make this place run. And until the Capitol was remodeled, the legislators did not have offices. They do now, and they're off these corridors, the House on the East Corridor and the senators on the West Corridor. So they have kind of pool secretaries, if you will. If you walk in and there's a group of offices and there may be 1 or 2 secretaries that serve as the administrative support for several legislators. The committee chairs each have their own secretaries, and so does leadership. And those secretaries are so important to know because they can help you have access to people that you need to talk to. So it's really worth getting to know who those secretaries are and having a good working relationship with them. Doorkeepers are outside both the Senate and the House on the 3rd floor, and they do exactly what their name implies. They kind of are the people who keep people in and people out, and They're the folks that if the Senate or the House is in session and you want to send a message into your legislator, you write it on a note. They've got paper on their desk, and you write it on a note and hand it to them, and they take it in, give it to a page who takes it in and delivers it, and then perhaps your senator or representative will come out and visit with you in the lobby. Pages and interns are high school and college students who work at various jobs around the Capitol. They're not paid, but it's a wonderful experience for any young person to be able to kind of see the legislature from the inside. Lobbyists, you probably passed the lobby, a room down the hall that said lobbyists on it in one of those big safes. And that's an interesting thing that they're in a safe. When that door is open, it's kind of a lobby lounge, and it's where they go. They pay so much, and they go in and they have their donuts and coffee and hobnob with each other, and you can't go in there unless you're a lobbyist or a lobbyist has invited you in. So it's their little space. The media there's a media pool that operates out of here during the session. It's down in the other wing. It's in the east wing. And most of the big state daily newspapers have a person who's here during this session. Dan Popke and others from the Statesman are here. Betsy Russell's here from the Spokesman Review. The Idaho State Journal has a reporter here. And that's where they work out of, is that media pool on the east wing. You'll see state agency people around, and they wear a tag that looks like this. So if you see a red tag, that's somebody who works for the state. Typically, state agency personnel are not participating in the legislative process unless they've had an invitation to come over and speak to a committee or meet with a legislator, except us. And it's our job to be over here. So we're kind of an anomaly that we're a state agency, but we're advocates, and there aren't really any other state agencies that quite operate like that. And then I already talked about the media. I want to say just a short thing about redistricting, or sometimes called reapportionment. Every 10 years, when they do the census, they redraw all the legislative boundaries. I suppose some of them might stay the same, but most of them change. And Idaho has grown so rapidly over the last 10 years that before the redistricting, some of the districts had, probably 30,000 people in them, and some had 80,000 people in them. So you really didn't have one person, one vote. The districts were not equal at all. So that's what they try to accomplish with redistricting, is to draw those lines so that all the districts, all the 35 districts are relatively the same size. The law will only allow a small variation between districts. We had a redistricting commission that you probably heard a lot about in the press. We had two of them, as a matter of fact. We had one that spent about 9 months and ended up with no plan. And then we had one that came in and in about 2 weeks had one. And so we do have a plan going forward. It's my understanding that there have been at least 2 legal challenges brought to that plan already. There may be more. And that happens when like towns, I think Twin Falls has been apportioned into 3 different legislative districts. So they're taking that to court, saying that they shouldn't be divided up that way. But that almost always happens when you have redistricting. So hopefully it will be resolved relatively quickly. We've got a campaign coming that people will be running in those districts in 2012. So the folks that I mentioned, the leadership folks, this is the last year for them in that position, perhaps. Not that they couldn't be in leadership or in the legislature again. But you've got, with redistricting, it can throw incumbents running against one another. One example was Senator Broadsword, Joyce Broadsword, who serves on JFAC and Health and Welfare in the Senate. and Senator Sean Keogh were both going to be running against each other in District 1 up north. And Senator Broadsword decided to bow out and not compete with Senator Keogh for that position. So you see some of that playing out, and we'll see that playing out. So some of the people that if you know some of the people in the legislature, they may not be in the legislature anymore. They may decide that they don't want to run against a fellow incumbent, or you know, it's their time to leave. It's really interesting that Speaker Denny and Majority Leader Moyle will have to run against 3 other people in the same legislative district in this coming year. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. Okay, so we're going to talk about the how a bill becomes a law process, and I want to tell you that I brought some of these over, and if you haven't picked them up, they're on the table outside, and they explain a lot of this as well as some good tips for communicating with your legislators. So please, our council puts this out. Please help yourself to 1 or more copies of that. So here we go. Often this is kind of what a bill might look like when it's introduced. And then the committee gets a hold of it and makes it a little more complicated. And then maybe it goes to the floor and it's amended, and then it's enacted and it needs a little help, as you can see. And then it maybe isn't funded terribly well. And then I think we've all seen this, of how it's implemented by the state and reported by the media and understood by the rest of us, and what we needed in the first place. So let's talk a little bit about the process. A legislation can come from anything. It can come from an idea you have, your legislator has, a state agency person has, a interest group has, Medicaid Matters has. So it comes from an idea or a concept or a need, and then that's brought to a legislator who has legislation drafted. And when it's first drafted, it is called a routing slip, or an RS. And that version of that legislation is not yet public. It belongs only to that legislator and whoever that he or she decides to share copies with. But then it's taken to the House or the Senate and introduced in a committee. And you might see on a committee agenda, it'll say RS 10765. And when it comes before that committee, what it's having is a print hearing. That's not a time that the public can testify. That's a time when the committee decides whether or not, looking at this draft legislation, they want to print it. And most of the time they do, just out of courtesy. So they vote to print the legislation, and then it's given to legislative services, and it's given, they could vote not to print it, but that doesn't happen terribly often. It happens, but not a lot. So once it's printed, it's given a bill number, and then it is public. Then you can come down to the State House and get a copy in the bill room on this level in the East Wing, or you can print it out online. And if it's in the House, it's got an H before the number, and if it's in the Senate, it's got an S before the number. And House bills are 3 digits and Senate bills are 4 digits. And the bill goes to the floor it goes through several readings on the floor, and that has kind of some historical significance that we really don't have time to get into. But it goes to the floor for first reading and introduction, and then at that time it's assigned to a committee. The leadership assigns it to a committee. And generally, the committee that it goes to is the committee it makes sense to go to. If it's a health and welfare issue, it goes to the Health and Welfare Committee. If it's a transportation, it goes to transportation. You may have a bill that the chairman of the committee knows is coming, and they ask to have it sent to their committee because they want to have some say over the hearings that happen on that bill. So then the committee has the bill before them, and you can see what the committee can do. The committee can table or hold the bill. I need my glasses. They can decide they want more information, and so they'll hold it till somebody else comes to provide the information that they need. They can kill the bill. They can say we don't like this, and vote it down, or they can send it to the floor, and they can send it to the floor. Generally, it goes to the floor with a recommendation for it to pass, and you'll hear them say the motion will often be in the committee. I'd like to send this to the floor with a do pass recommendation, and that means the committee is recommending that the full body pass the bill. So the bill goes to the floor. It appears on the second reading calendar, and then on the third reading, which is generally the next day, the sponsor of the bill, and the sponsor of the bill has probably been the person who presented it in the committee. And the sponsor will rise and explain the bill, talk about the bill, introduce the bill. And then the leadership will ask for people, they will open debate. So people can speak against the bill, they can speak for the bill. Sometimes people will want to speak more than once. And when that happens, generally they try to let everybody speak once before everybody speaks a second time. And then after the debate's finished, the leader will ask the sponsor of the bill to close debate, and often the person will just stand up and not say much more, but just say, Mr. Speaker, debate is closed. And then they'll take a vote. In most circumstances, a simple majority passes the bill. There are concurrent resolutions or other things where it might require more, but basically it's a simple majority. If the vote is yes, then the bill goes over to the other chamber. So if it started in the Senate, then it goes to the House. If it started in the House, it goes to the Senate. If the majority of the members vote no, the bill's dead. It doesn't move from that point. Now, it doesn't mean a similar bill couldn't be brought forward. You heard about House Bill 221. That was replaced by House Bill 260 that had a lot of similarities. So it doesn't mean the issue is dead for the session, but that particular bill is. So it goes to the other chamber, and it goes through the very same process. It goes to it's introduced on the floor. It's assigned to a committee. It has the same committee options, a hearing. The committee votes on the bill, and then I think it's important to know that when it moves over to the other chamber, the bill number doesn't change. It doesn't become a House bill when it goes to the House. It's a Senate bill from the time it starts till it goes through, or if it started in the House, it's a House bill. So then it goes to the floor of the next chamber. It's voted on, and once again, if it's a majority, then the bill passes, and if it's not, then the bill's dead. So you could have a bill that got all the way through the House committee, the House voted in support, even if the House was heavily in support of the bill, and then it gets over to the Senate side. The Senate committee even votes it out, and the Senate on the floor defeats the bill. The bill's gone through all that rigmarole, but now it's dead. And that happens. But one thing, amending the bills, if a bill goes through one house and then goes to the second house and it's amended, it has to go back and repeat the same process in the house it originated in, because it has to pass both houses in the same exact version. And I suppose you could kind of keep this going back and forth if each house kept amending it, but it has to ultimately be passed by both houses in the same version. And you'll hear about things like Joint memorials, concurrent resolutions, various things, they can be handled a little bit differently than bills. I know concurrent resolutions are what are used to create interim committees. If you've ever heard of interim committees, they're committees of legislators that meet between the legislative sessions to study a particular issue. And so they use a concurrent resolution to create those interim committees. And generally each year, there's probably 12 to 15 concurrent resolutions creating interim committees that move through the legislature. And if they pass all the way through, they're held by leadership. And at the end of the session, then the leadership will decide kind of which of those are the most urgent, which of those they can afford to staff and conduct, and then they'll probably approve maybe 3 to 5 of those. As I mentioned, the Joint Finance and Appropriations Committee develops and approves all the budget bills. No public testimony is allowed, and the committee, although the committee sometimes does seek some advice from a state agency person or another person. And I'm going to have a little more at the tail end here about about the budget process. So after a bill has passed through both chambers, same version, it goes to the governor. So the governor can sign the bill into law, which is what happens with most of the bills. He can veto it, which kills it. Or he can, if he's got a bill in front of him that he just doesn't really like, but he doesn't want to veto, he doesn't dislike it enough to veto it, but he really isn't supportive of it, he can let it become law without his signature. And a few years ago, we had a number of bills vetoed, not because of the content of the bill, but because the governor was trying to send a message. And so all those bills, and a lot of them were appropriation bills, a lot of them had to be developed and run through the process again, because once they're vetoed, they're vetoed. So then after the bill is signed by the governor, we're going to assume he signed it, it may require the agency that's responsible for implementing the legislation to have rules or change their rules to implement the law. Now, I really don't have a lot in here about rules, but in your packet, you should have something that says rules at the top. And this is just some very basic information about what rules are and why they're important, and I'll tell you they're very important. More and more all the time, things are being decided and done through rule more than law, because law is kind of the broad top level, and then rules are kind of the nuts and bolts of how it's going to happen. And the rules have to go before the legislature every year and be approved. Any rule changes, and so you have an opportunity near the first of the session to offer testimony on these rules. The rules are heard in the appropriate committee, and you can go and sign up and provide testimony on rules. You have to be really, you really kind of have to do your homework about knowing how to read rules and where they are and watch the committee agendas, because there's a lot of them and they have long numbers, and the explanation of what the rule does is not necessarily doesn't provide much explanation. And so use this little guide as a means of how to read rules, and then if there are particular rules that you're interested in, just I'd look at the legislative agendas in the committees that might handle those rules, and do it on a daily basis at the beginning of the session, because that's when the rules are heard. And then sometimes the rules are heard in subcommittees. There are so many rules, particularly in health and welfare, that the health and welfare committees will divvy them up, and there'll be like 3- and 4-person subcommittees that review the rules. And then they come back with a recommendation on a packet of rules for the full committee. And the full committee may not may not take much time to talk about them because most of the conversation has been in the subcommittee. So watch for those subcommittees too, because they're posted just like the regular committees. It'll say something like Nielsen Subcommittee or Block Subcommittee, and that's the legislator who's in charge of that subcommittee. So rules are very important, and it's worth going through this, even if it seems kind of dry and boring, because it'll help you be able to navigate the legislative session in terms of knowing what to do with rules. So, where are we now? Okay, so now you know the process, and this is just a little bit about how you can track it. Now, a lot of this is oriented to online. And I know that it's really hard if you don't have access to the internet or you don't live in Boise and have transportation to get to the Capitol. So I think the best bet, if you don't have either of those options, is to hook yourself up with a group that does have access to the internet and rely on the networking in that group to help you have this information. But if you have access to the internet, you can go online. I'm way behind here. And go to the legislative website. Go to the State of Idaho website, click on Legislature, which will take you to the legislative website. And then you can just click on Legislation. And then you can see the bills in a couple of ways. All the bills, as I said, have a number. So you can go to something that says the mini data bill sheet and click on that, and it will list all the bills by number. So if you know the number of the bill, you just scroll down to the number of the bill you're looking for and click on that, and it will bring it up. Or you can, if you don't know the bill number, but you know it's about public transportation, well, you can go and look down under transportation, public transportation, and then see the bills listed by number under that topic and pick which one sounds like the one you're after, and then click on that. So when you click on the bill number, it'll give you a lot of good information about the bill. It'll give you an outline of what's happened with the bill, when it was introduced, what committee it was in, what the committee action was, if there was a vote, if a vote's been taken, what the vote was. It will tell you, it'll even list out what legislators voted for it, what legislators voted against it. It won't give you information about what happened in committee. I think if you want to look at committees, you have to dig a little deeper, and it takes a while for committee minutes to get posted, but they are available online. And then after that action on the bill, that information, it'll give you the full text of the bill, so you can read it. And if you've ever seen a bill, the lines are all numbered, and that's very purposeful, so that when people are debating it or reading it in committee, they can refer to page 1, line 27. So it helps with explaining pieces of the bill that people might have questions about, that sort of thing. It'll give you the full text of the bill. It'll give you something called the Statement of Purpose, or SOP. And the Statement of Purpose is a separate document that has a plain language description of what the bill does or says. And then down at the bottom, it will give you the fiscal impact, if it's going to cost anything, and how much, and what the source of those funds will be. And then it will give you who the sponsors are of this bill. Either it's a legislator, it might say Association of Counties. So it could be a group, it could be a legislator, it could be legislative services. So you also will want to know, and this will lead into the next presentation, about finding your legislator. You may know who your legislator is, but that's only for one more term or one more session. You will have, in all likelihood, you will have different legislators, at least some of you, after the election in 2012. So you're going to want to know, if you're going to get involved in this process, you're going to need to know who your legislator is. Go back to that legislative website and click on Who's My Legislator? There we go. If you know your legislative district, you're ahead of the game. And once again, though, you may not know, I mean, your legislative district may change. So the best way to find out what legislative district you're in after this redistricting is to call your county clerk. And there's a list of county clerks that, there's a link that will take you to the county clerk's listing, and you can call your county clerk and just give them your address and they can tell you what legislative district you're in. So once you know your district, then you can click on the Senate or the House. They're all down the left-hand side of the screen. And then you can click on membership, and then it will list all the members of the House or all the members of the Senate. And they're listed, they're not listed by district number, they're listed by their name alphabetically. So if you don't know their name, you're just going to have to scroll down through and look for your legislative district. And remember, if you're doing the Senate, you're going to find one, and if you're doing the House, you're going to look for two names. And it will give you a picture, it'll give you their home address, their district number, their party affiliation, phone number, occupation, committee, the committees they sit on. And then there's a little click. There's two other places you can click. You can click on something that says additional information, and it will give you more biographical information about them, what clubs they belong to or where they went to school, that sort of thing. Or you can click on a little email link if you want to send them a message. So let's talk just a minute about how budgets are set. Now, I said that JFAC sets all the appropriations, but when Jim was talking earlier about revenues, the Idaho Constitution requires the state to have a balanced budget, not like Congress. We can't appropriate more than we have, or more than we think we're going to have. That's been the trick. So the appropriations that are set by the legislature are based on the revenue projections that we expect to have for that coming year. And as Jim said, our fiscal year for the state starts the 1st of July and runs through the 30th of June. So we are currently in fiscal year 2012, but when the legislature meets this year, we're going to be setting the budget for fiscal year 2013. So it's always tricky when you're having to set a budget for something that's not going to take place for another 15 to 18 months. A lot can happen in between. We talked a little bit about that we've been seeing the legislature set the projections for revenue at less than what the state economist is suggesting. And what this has done is provide an opportunity for the legislature to then set budgets, set appropriations that match that lower revenue, and as a consequence, cut things, cut services. And that's precisely what has happened the last couple of years. Every summer, really spring and summer, the state agencies start to develop their budgets for the following year. So they're coming up on the end of 12, and they're setting the budgets for 14. I mean, you're really reaching out into the future. So in the fall, all the agencies give their budget requests to the governor's budget office. If there's like divisions within health and welfare, they send them up to the director's office, and then all the budgets go to the governor's budget office. And then the governor decides kind of what he's going to include and what he's not going to include. But none of us know that until January, when he makes his State of the State address, which is when his budget is also released. The governor used to make two separate addresses, used to make a State of the State and a budget address, but now it's just all folded into one. So that's when he releases. We'll know what the governor's budget is January 9th. Is that when I think that's when it starts. So early in the session, the state agencies each make presentations to JFAC. They have to go in and make a presentation about how they've spent their money the previous year and what they're requesting in their budget request for the coming year. I've done it. It's very scary. So once JFAC has heard from all the state agencies and handled what are called supplemental appropriations, which are agencies that need more money to get through the current year. Maybe there have been a lot of fires and they need more funds to cover the cost of those fires. They were not anticipated. So that they will come in and say to the legislature, we need another $2 million in this budget. The legislature can say no or yes. Typically they say yes, but because really the funds have already been spent. So the legislature is giving them approval to spend money that they already had to cover. So once they've heard from all the state agencies, dealt with the supplemental appropriations, then they start setting appropriations bills. These bills, it's interesting, these bills say how much each agency can spend on personnel, on operations, on capital outlay, which are large purchases, buildings, cars, that sort of thing, and then contracts for services, which are called trustee and benefits. And that's where a lot of our funds are in those contracted services. The budgets also, the appropriations bills also say where the money's coming from. So is it coming from the state general fund? Is it coming from federal money? And they don't say where in the federal government, they just say federal. Or is it coming from dedicated funds? Or is it some miscellaneous? And I don't know if I've put it here or put it later, that these appropriations bills can go to the House or go to the Senate. And when they are passed out of JFAC and onto the floor, very seldom are they, is any effort made to amend them on the floor. Now it's happened when people were feeling particularly spunky, but typically it's not looked on very favorably and doesn't go very far. The JFAC has such power that once the appropriation bills come out of that committee, they're pretty well greased to go on through the process. So they must pass both houses, same version, just like all the rest of the bills. There's generally one appropriation bill for every agency. Health and welfare has typically is so big, they'll divide it up into 6 or 7 bills, but last year it was one bill, one huge bill. But that was unusual. It hasn't typically been that way. And there's been an interesting thing that's happened the last few years. And you heard Jim talk about House Bill 701 that gave the authority for those temporary rules. 701 was the Medicaid appropriation bill for that year. Appropriation bills are only good for a year. So that by its nature made it temporary. But all that language that talked about all those cuts were put at the tail end of an appropriation bill in what's called intent language, which is where the legislature tells the agency not only what it can spend, on what, from what source, but then it kind of takes it to the next level and says, and here's all these strings attached to how you can spend it. And House Bill 701 did that with all those cuts. So intent language can be very powerful, as you can see, and there's been some concern voiced by people that you had the budget committee that doesn't take public testimony putting intent language about how a program is going to be run in an appropriation bill without any public input. So for the last few years, with kind of mixed results. The germane committees have been hearing from some of their constituents about getting input on how the particular agency's budget, and most of that's been health and welfare. And it's happened more, I think, in the House than it has in the Senate, trying to just gather input from providers, consumers, others about advice on the budget. And then the committee chairs make their own presentations to JFAC that presumably reflect that constituent input. But the constituent input varies widely by committee. Some committee chairs choose not to have that kind of gathering of information from constituents. Some just listen to the department. So that intent language is very, very powerful, and I think it took already powerful appropriation bills to the next level because it was telling people, it was really micromanaging agencies with language attached to their money. So here's some websites. You've got these in your handout. The first two are the legislative website and the Idaho web page. There's our website, the State Independent Living Council's website, and then Medicaid Matters. So I think if you go to any of those, you'll get most of the information you need to get you through the session. Thank you. I think we're kind of on time and probably ready for a break before we move into how you talk to your legislators. Thank you.